I work with paper. That is the simplest way to say it. I read what other people filed and forgot. Ledgers, board minutes, intake cards softened at the corners from 40 years of handling. Most of it is dull, a budget line, a signature, a date stamped twice because the first stamp smeared. But dull is where things get buried. The file I want to tell you about belonged to a man who never meant to be remembered. His name was Albert Rice. In the winter of 1923, he was a records clerk at a hospital in New York, 26 years old. Careful, the kind of man who alphabetized his own grocery receipts. He kept the cancer ward's treatment files. He logged them in. He pulled them when a physician asked. He refiled them when the physician was done. He was good at it because he found the work calming. A place for each thing in its place. One afternoon, a file did not come back. That is where this begins. Not with a conspiracy, with an absence. With a clerk who noticed that a folder he had logged into the cancer ward's active drawer had been moved to a drawer he was not allowed to open and reclassified under a code he had never been taught. He wrote it down anyway. Old habit. Before we go further, one thing. If you keep records for a living, or if you have ever felt that the official version of something is thinner than the truth it covers, stay with me. Subscribe. This channel reads the paper trail that institutions kept and assumed no one would ever line up again. We do not shout, we file now, the background. Because Rice did not work in a vacuum, and neither did the file he lost. To understand why a folder could simply walk out of an active drawer, you have to understand who paid for the building it walked through. By 1923, American cancer research was not a scattered thing. It had patrons. It had buildings with names carved over the doors, and the names were not the names of doctors. They were the names of fortunes. In 1901, the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research opened in New York. It was the first institution in the United States built solely to fund and house laboratory research into disease. The money came from John D. Rockefeller, whose Standard Oil fortune was by then the largest private fortune the country had produced. This is documented. The founding charter, the endowment, the board, all of it sits in the public record. You can read the minutes. I have. What the minutes show is not a villain. They show something quieter, and I think more important. They show a small group of men deciding, year by year, which diseases were worth a laboratory and which were not. Worth, that is the word that runs through the ledgers. Not cure, not need, worth. Then the General Education Board, chartered by Congress in 1903, also Rockefeller funded, began directing enormous sums into medical schools across the country. It did not just give money. It set conditions. It standardized curricula. It decided which schools survived and which closed. By the 1920s, a medical school that did not match the model the board favored often did not get funded, and a school that did not get funded did not last. Read that again slowly the way I had to. A private board, funded by one fortune, was deciding which medical schools in America lived and died. That is not a rumor, that is the structure. And once you control the schools, you control what the next generation of doctors is taught to believe is medicine, and what they are taught to dismiss as foolishness. And there was Memorial Hospital, the cancer hospital in New York, whose later endowments and reorganization would tie it, through donors and trustees, into the same web of Gilded Age money that built everything else. The hospital that decades on would carry the Sloan and the Kettering names. In Rice's day, it was already a magnet for the kind of philanthropy that arrives with conditions stitched into the gift. So here is the first frame I have to set, and I am going to set it plainly. It is documented that Rockefeller money founded, funded, and shaped a large share of American medical research in the first quarter of the 20th century. That is not a claim. That is the ledger. The buildings, the endowments, the board seats, the school grants, the conditions on those grants. All of it is in the record, and none of it is in dispute. It is a separate and far larger assertion to say that this money owned every cancer patent by 1922 and used that ownership to bury working cures. I want to be careful here. I have not held a single patent assignment in my hands that proves a deliberate, coordinated burial of a cancer cure. What I can show you is the funding, the control, and the decisions about what counted as legitimate research. The maximalist version, every patent, every cure, buried on purpose, is attributed to others. I am telling you what the paper supports, and marking the line where the paper stops. That line matters. Hold on to it. We are going to come back and stand on it again before this is done. Back to Rice. The file that vanished had a patient name he later could not produce, because he never copied it, because copying it was not his job and would have been a firing offense. What he did copy was the route: active cancer ward drawer in November, reclassified drawer in December, new code, no physician signature on the transfer slip, which by the hospital's own procedure was required, a blank where a name should be. If you have spent your life around records, you know that a missing signature is louder than a present one. A present signature can lie. A missing signature is an institution telling you, in its own language, that it did not want anyone accountable for this. Reese started watching the reclassified drawer. Not opening it, he could not, but he could count. He could see which folders went in and never came out, and over the following months, he counted 9. 9 files moved out of the active cancer treatment record into a coded drawer that produced nothing back. 9. He began keeping his own ledger at home. A cheap school notebook, data file went missing, the code it was reclassified under. Whether a transfer slip existed and whether it was signed, he was not building a case. He told a friend years later that he was just trying to make the wrongness sit still long enough to look at. Now the anomalies, because one missing file is a clerical error. 9 with a pattern is something a careful man cannot unsee. First anomaly: every one of the 9 reclassified files concerned a treatment, not a patient outcome. Rice could tell from the routing tags, which described the document type even when they hid the content. These were not death certificates. They were not failures being tidied away. They were treatment records, the live paper of something being tried. Second anomaly: the reclassification code, Code 7, appeared nowhere in the hospital's own filing manual. Reese had memorized that manual, codes 1 through 6, no 7. Someone had created a category that the institution's own rulebook did not acknowledge, a drawer that officially was not supposed to exist. Third anomaly: the dates clustered. The 9 moves happened in a 14-week window between November and the following February. Records do not behave that way on their own. Paper drifts, it does not march. 9 files do not decide in the same season to leave together unless something is walking them out. Fourth anomaly, and this is the one that kept Rice up at night. After each file moved, the physician who had opened it stopped requesting it. Not gradually, at once, as if the doctor had been told the matter was closed and had agreed that it was. A man who had asked for a file every week for a month, and then, the week after it vanished, never asked again and never asked where it went. I have laid these 4 out the way Reese laid them out, because the structure is the evidence. Any one of them alone is noise, a lost file, a clerk's error, a doctor moving on. Stacked, dated, coded, they describe a procedure. Someone, somewhere above the ward, had a procedure for making certain treatment records cease to circulate, and the people who carried it out knew not to leave their names on it. Rice was not the only one who noticed. There was a night nurse on the cancer ward, a woman named Hedda Lindqvist, who had been on the floor 11 years. She told Rice, in the quiet of a late shift, that twice she had cared for patients who improved on a treatment regimen and then, within the same week, had that regimen discontinued with no explanation entered in the chart. She had asked. She had been told it was a funding matter on a ward at a bedside. That phrase stayed with both of them. A funding matter, because it is the seam where the ledger I keep meets the ward where she worked. The decision about a treatment was not described as a medical decision. It was described as a money decision. And money on that ward ran uphill to the same foundations and boards whose names were carved over the doors of the research institutes. Lindqvist remembered one of the two patients clearly, an older man, a tailor by trade, who had been failing and then, on the regimen, sat up and asked for the newspaper. She remembered the newspaper because it had seemed, that morning, like a small miracle. 8 days later, the regimen was gone from his chart, and so soon after was he. She never knew if the two were connected. She only knew the order of events, and that no one would tell her why the order had gone the way it did. A second witness. The hospital's purchasing clerk, an older man near retirement, told Reese that orders for a particular preparation, he would not name it on paper, and Reese honored that, had been cut to zero by an instruction that came not from a physician, but from an administrative office tied to the hospital's principal benefactors. Cut to zero mid-protocol. 2 witnesses from 2 different corners of the building, each describing the same shape from a different angle. A nurse at the bedside, a clerk at the loading dock, and between them, a records man counting folders into a drawer that gave nothing back. Here is where I have to set the second frame, the one I promised you to watch for. What Rice and Lindqvist and the purchasing clerk witnessed was real, and the documents Rice kept were real. But what those documents prove exactly is narrower than the loudest version of this account would have you believe. They prove that treatment records were reclassified outside the rules. They prove that a category was invented to hold them. They prove that funding decisions made by administrative offices answerable to the institution's financial patrons overrode bedside continuity of care. They prove that the people closest to the work were told to stop and complied. They do not prove on their own that a cure for cancer existed, was recognized, and was deliberately destroyed to protect a fortune. I will not tell you that, because the paper in my hands does not tell me that. The strongest, most sweeping claim, that the Rockefeller interests held every cancer patent and buried every cure, belongs to the people who make it, and I am attributing it to them, not adopting it. What I will tell you is this: an institution does not invent a filing code to hide its triumphs. You do not bury what you are proud of. Now widen the lens, because the reason this matters is not 1923. It is the shape 1923 set, and the shape did not stay in 1923. The structure that Reese bumped into, research funded by private fortunes, channeled through tax-exempt foundations, with boards that decided which questions got money and which did not. That structure did not dissolve. It became the model. Through the General Education Board and its successors, through the great medical philanthropies, the principle hardened. Whoever funds the research influences which research happens, which gets published, which gets continued, and which quietly does not. This is not a secret, and it is not even controversial. Ask anyone who has written a research grant in the last 50 years, who decides what gets studied. Follow the money, they will tell you, and they are not whispering. The patron sets the agenda. That was true when the agenda was carved in stone over an institute door, and it is true now when it is written into a funding cycle and a peer review committee and a budget line in a building no one has ever named after a cure. So when you hear that money shapes what medicine studies, understand that this is not the fringe talking. It is the ledger. The fringe begins only at the next step, the one I keep refusing to take for you. The step from money shapes research to money buried the cure. I cannot walk you across that step on paper, but I can stand you at the edge of it and let you see how short the distance is. What Rice saw then was not an aberration. It was the system working exactly as designed on a single ward, on 9 files in one cold winter. The question is not whether powerful money shapes medical research. It documentably does and always has since 1901. The question The one the paper cannot answer, the one I refuse to pretend it answers, is how far, in any given case, that shaping went and what it cost the people in the beds. Let me give the other side its due, honestly, because I keep records, and a record kept fairly is the only kind worth keeping. The institutions built on this money also did extraordinary good. The Rockefeller Institute and the philanthropies around it funded research that pushed back hookworm, yellow fever, and the diseases of poverty across continents. The standardization the General Education Board imposed shut down genuine quackery, diploma mills selling worthless degrees to men who would then operate on people. Some of what got defunded deserved to be defunded. Centralized money raised the floor of American medicine, and millions lived who otherwise would not have. I will not pretend that ledger is one-sided. It is not. A defender would say Rice saw bureaucracy, not malice. That Code 7 was an ordinary administrative shortcut. That a discontinued protocol was discontinued because it did not work, and the funding language was just how administrators talked. That a tailor who sat up one morning was a man having a good day, not a man being cured. That a nurse and a clerk and a records man, none of them physicians, mistook the normal churn of a hospital for a plot. That is a fair argument. I have made it to myself, at this desk, late more than once. Most of what looks sinister in an archive turns out to be tired people doing approximate work in a hurry. The boring explanation is usually the true one. I believe that. It is most of what 40 years among the files has taught me. And then I come back to the missing signatures, to a filing code that the rulebook did not contain, to a 14-week cluster that paper does not produce by drifting, to a funding office, not a doctor, ending care at a bedside, to 2 witnesses in 2 corners describing the same machine. Bureaucracy explains a great deal. It does not, in my reading, explain all of this at once. I cannot close the gap between what the paper proves and what the loudest account claims. I am not going to pretend I can, but I can tell you that the gap is narrower than the defenders want and wider than the accusers admit, and that an honest reader has to stand in it without flinching toward either wall. Albert Rice left the hospital in 1925. He took a position cataloging for a county office, somewhere quieter, somewhere the files were about land and tax and the dead. He kept the school notebook for the rest of his life. He never published it. He never went to a newspaper. He told a friend once that he had thought about it and had understood that a clerk's notebook against a fortune's archive was a contest with one ending and not the one he wanted. When a younger relative finally read it, after his death, the entries stopped abruptly in February 1924. Mid-page, with 3 words and no explanation. The drawer was emptied. He never learned where the 9 files went. Neither have I. A drawer was emptied. The Code 7 category does not appear in any surviving filing manual from that hospital, which could mean it was discontinued, or it could mean the manuals that named it were among the things that did not survive. An archive is honest about everything except the holes in itself. I keep records for a living. I have learned that the most dangerous thing an archive can contain is not a damning document. It is a clean absence where a document should be. A blank signature line, a code with no definition, a drawer that gives nothing back. The institution that buries something rarely leaves the proof of the burial in the same place as the thing it buried. It leaves a shape, a hollow, a silence with edges. And a careful man, if he is patient, can sometimes trace the edges and tell you the size of what is no longer there. So I will not tell you the Rockefellers buried the cure for cancer. The paper in my hands does not let me say it, and I respect the paper too much to say what it does not. I will tell you that by the 1920s, a handful of fortunes had bought the right to decide what American medicine would study, and that on at least one ward, in at least one winter, that right was used to end treatment that someone, somewhere, did not want continued, and to do it without a single name on the slip. That much the ledger holds. The archive was never destroyed. It was just buried. Next time, we go back further, to 1903, to a different fortune and a different ledger. They say J.P. Morgan's interests held 1,247 patents by then, and that the list of what those patents covered is more interesting for what is missing from it than for what is on it. I have been reading the gaps. I will see you in the next file.